Well, thank you for your talk, Peter. So thoughtful, and I think many of us appreciate your thoughtful and skeptical approach to this new technology and the way it can be applied. Not surprisingly, there are already a lot of questions in the chat. So why don't I start with one of those and kind of building on. I think maybe building on your ideas about what are the responsibility of this community. So one of the first questions is about some of the risks, and I'll just read it. AI models' ability to answer medical questions and ability to translate multiple languages is a big advantage, and will have a surge of consumer apps adoption. But there's a risk of self-diagnosis, and in a couple occasions, I've watched people discuss treatments by referencing ChatGPT. And this audience member asks how to reduce these risks. And I would add to that, what is the responsibility of this audience of physicians and clinicians and biomedical researchers in helping to both harness the technology and lay the foundation for appropriate guardrails?
Yeah, so, it's something that concerns me. When we were starting our research on this back in August of 2022, research was going fine. At that time, I was just really blown away, by the performance on USMLE. And then in November 30th, ChatGPT gets released. And ChatGPT got released using a toy model called GPT 3.5. And 3 days later, I got the first email from a clinician colleague that said, "Wow, Peter, this is great stuff." I've asked my admin to write all of our visit summaries using ChatGPT. I was alarmed by that. And in fact, I escalated that immediately to the legal department within Microsoft, saying, exactly your question. And I think it's a question that we all have. I would have been alarmed even with GPT-4, but with GPT 3.5, it was very significant. And then, over the next days, there were even more emails like this. And in fact, that's what motivated writing the book, saying, wow, this has to be, there have to be the right guardrails. The challenge there, and I think, in talking to regulators, not just in the US, but in other parts of the world, regulators are in a tight spot here. For one thing, AI has become a central technology in the equation for national competitiveness. And so there's no regulator anywhere in the world that wants to be seen as standing in the way of national competitiveness. I do think that the White House executive order several weeks ago is helpful in giving implicit permission to regulators to act. And so I understand, coming from Microsoft, sometimes we get accused of attempting regulatory capture, but it seems blindingly obvious that there need to be clear regulations on the use of this technology. And so it must happen. For Microsoft, we started to think very clearly and thoughtfully about our own responsibilities here. And it does seem that in a very general purpose type of technology, that there has to be some shared accountability. And so we've taken the first step on copyright issues. So if creators produce things using our AI models, the AI models that we provide, and then get into some copyright violation problems, we provide some shared accountability and indemnification. But how far that goes is unclear, and these are things that I think have to be worked out. Most abstractly, the analogy I've tried to give is to imagine that we've just invented copper wire, and we've discovered that it efficiently carries electrical current from point A to point B very efficiently. And we know that this is going to be transformative for human life. It's going to make everything better, but we don't know why yet, because we haven't yet invented the light bulb. We don't know what the applications are, truly. And without that, it's hard to know how to regulate this copper wire. it's hard to know, what standards, whether we need insulation and what standards there are, what the electrical codes, building codes should be, and so on. And so my conclusion is that it's the medical community needs to get up to speed in assertively taking ownership of the question of whether, when, and how this technology should be used, should develop guidelines like the National Academy of Medicine, the AI Code of Conduct, or what the AMA is trying to do. But I think academic medical centers like Stanford Medicine have a particular obligation to start to be very assertive about these guidelines and provide the foundation for that regulation, and how accountabilities are shared. I realize that's a very abstract answer, but in this sort of unusual situation, I don't know how else we can approach it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think I do think this is a combined mission for all of us to, do the research that needs to be done so that we can inform some of the regulations and the guardrails that need to be in place. So there is also a lot of interest in the role of these tools in medical education, and how do you think that generative AI can be used in medical school and residency curriculum? What might be the potential benefits or downsides of using it in that type of training?
Yeah. So let me say, so I love the question, because I am a little bit concerned that of all the aspects of medicine, so broadly speaking, I've been thrilled at how the medical world has embraced the need to confront generative AI and think really hard about it. And I see the best minds in medicine around the world really engaged in thinking hard about this. It's thrilling to me to see the National Academy of Medicine, for example, just moving for them at lightning speed with this AI Code of Conduct effort. And in fact, if you look at that as a specific example, they've been talking to various different sectors of the world of healthcare in developing the principles for that kind of code of conduct. But one thing that is notably absent from all of this is our medical schools and medical education. And it just seems like that's something that needs to be addressed. So if there's one area of disappointment I have right now, it's the lack of visible action in the kind of medical education world. And that includes not just medical schools, but accrediting bodies like LCME, the bodies of medical school deans and so on. I think it's urgent that the concepts around generative AI, what it is and isn't, the ability to track the developing trajectory of the technology, and the emerging use cases and adoption roadmaps are all topics that should be used. Also, just for medical students, I'm on the board of directors of the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine, and when a few months ago they were all, the M1 students were all studying for step 1, the USMLE. Of course, that was before GPT-4 was released, but I myself was studying for step 1, and a great study guide was to take, a USMLE problem, give the problem to GPT-4, and then ask GPT-4, please play act the role of the patient described in this vignette. I will be the doctor. Let's have an encounter. And then when I say done with encounter, please assess how well I've done. And the ability of GPT-4 to play that role is similar to the interactive part of step 3 of the USMLE. Was just a tremendous study aid. And so you would also just love to see students have access to that kind of tool and be encouraged to use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much opportunity to augment the traditional medical education, and I think there's a new mandate, as you were saying, for our trainees to learn about these new technologies in this new field. I'm program director for clinical informatics fellowship, and our fellows are all over this, but it needs to trickle down throughout all of our trainees.
Right. And I think that accrediting bodies also need to account for this, because, that's a big constraint on what medical schools can do.
Absolutely.
Mm.
All right. There are also quite a few questions on kind of some of your topics around AI alone versus human plus AI performance, and what is unique about how, like, to your point about the kind of unique aspects of these large language models. How do you see that collaboration, or the role that these tools should play with humans?
Yeah. So one thing, so keep in mind that GPT-4 from OpenAI, or Gemini was just released from, or is about to be released from Google. These are a class of AI models that, at least speaking for OpenAI and Microsoft, we felt were solid enough and safe enough for broad public deployment. But what's coming next is substantially more capable, and so I think that the question is a little bit difficult, because what is reasonable and safe today is different than how we might think about in the future. So today, when I think about the use, let's say clinical use, let's say in any kind of clinical decision support for today's most advanced models, I very firmly believe that human beings should do their own work. A doctor or nurse should make their own decisions, but then be encouraged possibly to use the model as a second set of eyes on that work. And that kind of work mode is also encouraged in our early products, like Copilot, where the review and critique and evaluation of human generated work, I think, works surprisingly well. And it also just sets the clear accountabilities of things. If you look at what Epic has done, Epic is not only structuring things so that there needs to be kind of human approval of any AI output, but they're going through the step of working with organizations like Stanford Medicine to do clinical studies of these things. So I think all of that's important for now. And that also then implies a disclosure, oftentimes, to patients. In the case of what, say, Stanford is doing in the early deployments of the inbox application at Epic, there's a disclosure that tells patients that that this note was in part authored by AI. And those disclosures, I think, are also important in this early stage. But there'll come a time in a small number of years where I think the disclosures will flip, where the use of AI will be expected in the same way that any critical new medical technology is expected. And that means that there's a flipping of disclosures, where if a doctor or nurse chooses not to use the assistance of AI, that might imply the need for a disclosure. So as we just think about this, we just need to keep an open mind as to just how deeply integrated these things get into practice. The silly example I give is, we would never expect a doctor to lay hands on a patient without sanitizing hands first. And I believe firmly that there will come a time when we would never expect a doctor, say, to come to a diagnostic conclusion without the assistance of AI.
Absolutely. All right. Why don't we close out with one last question about health disparities? I think there's, thankfully been national growing recognition of the impact of health disparities and attempts to address them. This question is, can you speak to the opportunities and challenges for AI to address health disparities or exacerbate disparities, especially if the benefits trickle down to underserved communities who already have a distrust in the system?
Yeah, I've had personally some humbling experiences of this. I think just as a techie and a computer scientist, I think I'm not unlike most techies. I have this incredible optimism that technology can solve these horrible problems of access to healthcare. And it just makes sense to me as a techie that a technology like this that can be globally distributed and be in every person's pocket, at least in every part of the world where you can actually have access to the internet and a smartphone. It just seems like a path to giving democratized access to the best medical knowledge, to be able to just answer questions. And in my own life, I feel that myself, because there are times when I have to deal with a specialist, let's say in the care of a family member, and you can feel very anxious and disempowered, but being able to consult with the GPT-4 to help decode, some labs and, other notes is just incredibly empowering. It makes you smarter when you talk to these folks. But it's also been humbling because I think through quite a few experiences and projects, you learn that the issue of health equity is not a technology problem. And in fact, as I've reflected on this, the thing that is really so important about great medical institutions, and it's so ingrained in medical institutions that I've discovered that the people who work in them don't even think about it. It's just a part of the ethos, is how hard they work every day, all day, to establish and maintain trust. Trust of patients, trust of the public. And it's so ingrained into healthcare organizations that it's intrinsic, just part of the DNA of the people who work in the organization and of that organization. And technology, doesn't have that. And so I think there somehow needs to be a more of a societal and community orientation, hopefully amplified and augmented through technologies like large language models, in order to really address health equities. And at a minimum, when we develop these technologies today, we should do everything we can to prevent it from becoming yet another digital divide between haves and have-nots. And so just speaking for all of us at Microsoft, we're working incredibly hard to, of course, it aligns with our business priorities too, but we're working incredibly hard to have as widespread access to this technology as possible. But it's an active discussion to, at a minimum, avoid creating yet more disparities through this technology.